4.4, subtracting polynomials. Make sure that you put in your name to organize your notes, and make sure that you also put on the date. So basically, subtracting polynomials is the same thing as you've been doing with collecting like terms and adding polynomials, but to subtract, you must distribute the negative. So just before we distribute the negative, I just want to remind you of a few things. If we multiply a negative by a negative, that's always going to be a positive. When we multiply a negative by a positive, we get a negative. When we multiply or divide, really, a positive by a negative, we get another negative. And if there are two positives, that is also a positive. So even number of negatives, it's always going to be positive. Okay? Odd number of negatives, that's always going to be negative. So if you have 3 negatives, that's going to be negative. If you have 5 negatives, it's going to be negative. If you have 1 million negatives, you're going to get a positive, because 1 million is an even number. Hopefully you won't have to multiply a million numbers by each other. That sounds like a long and difficult task. So I give you these helpful hints here with a little disclaimer. This is only for multiplying and dividing. Okay, adding and subtracting have a whole different set of rules. So let's talk about what I mean by distributing the negative. So that means that this negative has to go to this positive x squared, and this negative has to go to this negative 2x. So step number 1, you want to rewrite with no brackets. So step number 1, I'm going to say, okay, 3x squared plus 4x. I can drop the bracket because there's no negative in front of that bracket. So I'm going to say negative times a positive is going to be a negative, so that's minus x squared. You're noticing that I'm using negative and minus kind of interchangeably. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then I'm going to say negative times a negative is a positive, so that's plus 2x. So if we're saying that something's a negative, that's kind of just a describer as to what kind of number it is. But when we're talking about a minus or a subtraction, you're kind of using that as a verb. It's what you do. Okay? So if I'm subtracting a negative number, that means that I'm ending up adding. Now that's a that's a lot of English language. Just know that if you're distributing this this negative here, it's like we're distributing this. What happens here is we're actually multiplying through by a negative 1, and you'll see more examples of that in a little bit. So I'm just gonna rewrite this. I'm gonna say 3x squared minus x squared, kind of collecting like terms a little bit. And then I'm going to say plus 4x plus 2x. So 3x squared minus x squared is 2x squared. 4x plus 2x is positive 6x. I'll put a box around it because I like my teacher. That means I like myself. Very good. So let's look at this one. This one's a little bit different. We have 3 numbers that we need to distribute to. Just letting you know that a very common mistake is that you just apply this negative to the first number, but then kind of ignore the other ones. Don't do that. Learn from students who have come before you and made that mistake about 1 million times. No, probably like billions of times before you got to it. Stand on their shoulders, learn from their mistakes, and don't do it yourselves. So first thing first, I'm going to rewrite with no brackets. So 5b squared minus 2b plus 5. And remember, I can just drop the brackets because there's no negative in front. But I need to distribute this negative. I need to multiply through this bracket by negative 1. So I'm going to say negative 7b squared negative times a negative is a positive, so plus 2b. Negative times a positive is a negative, so that becomes negative 3. Now, another mistake that people make is they just say minus plus 3. Okay, so they'll have a minus plus 3 like that. But I find that having more than one operation beside each other very confusing. So you can just do the kind of cleaning up work for yourself. So now I'm going to rewrite in the correct order. So 5b squared, matching up those like terms, minus 7b squared, minus 2b plus 2b plus 5 minus 3. 5b squared minus 7b squared is negative 2b squared. Negative 2b plus 2b is going to be 0. So I can either say plus 0 or I don't have to write anything at all. Plus 5 minus 3 is going to be plus 2. Put a box around it because I like my teacher. Last but not least, let's work on this one. I'm going to distribute this negative to the two terms that are in the bracket that this negative is in front of. So first things first, rewrite without the bracket. So 4x squared plus 6x minus 5x, negative times a positive is a negative, so negative 7. That's a common mistake that happens too, is people don't know what the sign is in front of, say, this 5x. But whenever you don't see a sign, you just assume that it's positive. So negative times a positive is a negative. I'm going to rewrite. Actually, let's just pay attention here. There are no other x squared terms, and the two x terms are right beside each other. So let's not do that rewrite because we don't need to. So 4x squared, 6x minus 5x is going to be plus x minus 7, and we're done. So the biggest summary, or the biggest important idea from this is always going to be distribute the negative. The negative to all terms in the bracket that follows it. And when I say distribute, I mean multiply through. By -1. Okay, so check your checklist for your Math IXLs that you need to work on, and write that master check as soon as you can.